I just kind of had this epiphany moment. I felt like a huge hypocrite, and I was like, I'm going about this completely the wrong way. Hi and welcome. The following video you're going to watch is a recording of a virtual talk that I did as part of the Product Expert series inside WooliesX. We had about 80 to 100 people in attendance, and the talk was titled Proven Strategies to Resolve Conflict and to Influence Stakeholders. In the talk, I walk you through 5 strategies that I've used over the years and I coach product managers on in order to generate more influence, to build trust, and to be able to resolve conflict with stakeholders. Stakeholder management is a staple skill that we need to have as product managers. And some of the tools and techniques that I talk about are also things that are featured inside the Stakeholder Management Essentials course over at Product Pathways. As part of walking you through those strategies, I'm going to share some of those hard-learned lessons that I had, some of the early mistakes that I made inside my career around stakeholder management. And I also walk through some of those less rosy examples. I walked through one scenario where we weren't empowered, or the product manager that I was working with at that time was not empowered to create a product strategy, and what we did around that and how we resolved that, as well as another example of a difficult stakeholder that I had that was due to his KPI being tied to delivering the next release by a certain date. So I'll walk you through some of those less rosy examples. I think that's really important because we often talk about perfect world product management, and I've definitely invested a lot of my time into trying to share examples outside of that, of the less rosy examples. This talk got a 5 out of 5 rating from the audience. As I said, we had about 80 to 100 people there. So I hope you get as much value out of it as all of they did. And on that note, I won't hold you any longer. Here is the talk. Yeah, thank you. Excited to be here. Yes, excited to see some familiar names and faces, which is always good. Thanks for the really great shout out. And I'm so uncomfortable with introducing myself. I'm like the worst for it, and I'm really bad at it. And every time I do it, people are like, even my speaking coach is like, you undersell yourself. I did a talk last night at a meetup for Propel Ventures with Pendo, and I actually did a slide where I was putting like logos together of like past clients and also all the product people and leaders and stuff I've coached and where they've all worked. And it actually was like an insane, I never actually put it together. Like I really should. And I was putting it together for the slide, and I don't have it in here, but it actually was pretty impressive. I like humbled myself actually. I was like, oh my God, I've pretty privileged. I feel very privileged that I get to spend so much time with so many great product people. But yeah, let's get into the topic. Unfortunately, once I start sharing screen, I'm going to lose seeing all of you in the chat. So it's me and a slide and staring at my wall. So I won't be able to see the chat and answer questions as we go, but maybe we can just do it all as Q&A at the end, if that works. Awesome. So we're going to talk about conflict resolution and influencing stakeholders, as Petra already said. Amazing introduction for me. Again, I'm terrible in introducing myself, but yeah, done some amazing work. Feel super privileged to work with amazing people all over the world and help them really do product better, which, as Petra already said, is really my mission and my why behind all this. People ask me like, why do I create content? And like I did the talk last night, didn't get home till like 9, 10 p.m. And it was an early morning for me yesterday, but it's so important to me to do all this, and why I'm willing to invest my time and put the energy and spend time with all of you is because I believe that we have a huge role that we play with the products that we build, and we can create a really positive impact in the world as a result of that. And I believe the secret to creating great products that create a really positive impact in the world is great product people. So these practices and those types of things I think is really important. And this is my way of scaling that impact and being able to create more content and give tools to you to help you create great products too, that I use, by the way, too, right? Like I'm a Woolies customer. So yeah, cool. But let's talk about influencing and stakeholder and conflict resolution and stakeholder management in a pretty much in a nutshell. This is from the 280 group, which is a product management consultancy, but they do these reports, and they looked into the challenges of product management. They do it every single year. And I actually pulled some stats because you don't need to look very far to find stats about stakeholder management and influencing with product. And over 43% of product managers stated that they were not able to influence effectively in their report. So that's nearly half. So if you did that as like if that was statistically representative, we could say that half the people here struggle or are not able to, or don't feel as though they are able to effectively influence. I'm hoping that in the next 20 odd minutes and plus the Q&A, I can try and change that a little bit. So why is this so much the case? We can laugh at this, but this is often how we feel, right? We feel like we're cornered. Everyone's coming at us. Everyone's got a request. Everyone's got a different opinion or a different thought of what we should do and why we should do it. And we can feel like this. I've definitely felt like this before. And the truth of the matter is that product success is a team sport, really. It's not like we can just lock ourselves in the corner and do something and products are going to be amazing and we're going to have an awesome customer experience and output on the other side. The reality is it involves everyone. And unfortunately, because products are our way to service our customers, we are kind of in the center of everything. And in a way, we definitely connect everything else together. We need to make sure marketing aligns with product and engineering needs to align with it. And our architecture needs to align with what we're trying to achieve. And our strategy, etc., and how we fund things, everything kind of comes together. And as a result, as product managers, we often end up being what I refer to as nodes. Like we are the connectors. So if you think about nodes inside like a system, they're all like the little things that connect everything together. So we are in the middle of everything. We connect everything together and we play a huge role in making that whole system and everything kind of working really, really well in order to deliver great products. So stakeholder management then is kind of a big deal. It's actually really important for us to be able to influence, be able to resolve conflict when things aren't aligning. And this becomes a huge part of our role. And maybe this is like, hate to break it to you or bad news, but if you don't like stakeholder management, well, I don't like stakeholder management, but if you're not willing to put a lot of time and energy into this, then you're probably in the wrong career. Just saying, because a decent amount of our time and portion of our day and energy should actually go to this. So with that in mind, I'm going to take you through 5 tips and strategies that are going to help you become more influential, help you be able to resolve conflict better. These are tips and strategies that I've kind of built up over the years. They've all served me very well. I've coached a lot of product managers on this as well and leaders, and it's also served them really well. So I hope to pass that knowledge on to you and it can hopefully serve you well as well. So the first one is this, that empathy goes both ways. And now this is probably sounding weird, probably doesn't make any sense, but I'm going to explain it. And this is one of my principles. So it makes sense to me and I'll explain it so it makes sense to you. We can all laugh at this picture too. This was me early in my career, that's for sure. I've never liked stakeholder management. It's not my most favorite activity. That's for sure. But I used to really struggle with it from the perspective of, I used to see it as like a chore, the activity that I just had to do. I had to just grind through it, get the pesky, stakeholders off my back. And then I can move on to the important work and the more value add stuff and the actual work, as sometimes we like to call it. But when I was working that way, all I was doing was I was, maybe disenfranchised a little bit, but I was viewing stakeholders as like adversaries, people I had to stay back, stay away and keep at bay. And my job was to really kind of manage them. And I don't know exactly where or when it occurred, but it occurred a couple of years into my journey, but I don't remember the exact catalyst, but I remember having a reflection point one day and I just felt like a massive hypocrite is how I felt. I was like, I spent so much time and energy trying to get my stakeholders to empathize with me, empathize with the team, empathize with our customers. Like we're saying, the customers don't actually need that, or, that's not a problem for them. We're trying to help them understand why we are behind schedule or something like that, right? Like you need to understand it's more complex than we expected it to be and those types of things. And I was putting so much time and energy into trying to get them to build empathy with me when I was doing pretty much nothing in terms of trying to build empathy with them. And I just kind of had this epiphany moment. I felt like a huge hypocrite. And I was like, I'm going about this completely the wrong way. And this is where the saying, and this is now one of my principles, which is that empathy goes both ways. As much as I want them to empathize with me, I also need to empathize with them. And this may seem like a no-brainer, but this shift really revolutionized how I thought about stakeholders, influencing, and everything like that. I stopped viewing stakeholders as adversaries and I started viewing them as partners. And I really started to have a hard time with the notion of stakeholder management. I started thinking more about stakeholder engagement, because management implies that you have to manage them when it's not about managing them. Like, why am I trying to manage them? They're my stakeholders. And let's be honest too, I'm yet to run into a stakeholder that like truly has like malice intent. Like, everyone wants to help. We all want the product to be successful. We all want the business to be successful. We all want ourselves to be successful, which we're part of that system. So when I started to make this shift, it was less about how do I manage them and more about, well, they want to succeed as much as I want to succeed. It's more, well, where's that dissonance coming from? Where's their point of view coming from? What are they, like, perspective they're coming from versus where am I coming from, right? And then as a result, I started to approach it just very differently. I started to think, well, I want to understand them. I want to understand their goals and their motivations. I want to understand why, they are acting in a certain way. What keeps them up at night? What's their motivations? What's their goals? All those types of things. And this is kind of my first tip, which is to just approach any form of conflict, any form of stakeholder relationship from an empathetic point of view. Approach it with curiosity and try to spend some time to unpack these things, unpack why they're saying what they're saying, why they're coming from that perspective. And now I know not all situations are rosy, so I'm going to tell you a story, and it's not a rosy story in a way. So I had a difficult stakeholder at one stage. He was the GM of digital, and he was given the team and myself a hard time about when are we going to get something done, delivery dates, all that type of stuff. And leading with this principle and this example, rather than trying to just convince him about, dates and things, I decided to try and understand his goals, his motivations. Where is he coming from? Why is there all this pressure all of a sudden? Like, why are you putting all this pressure on the team and on us? And what I ended up unpacking, and again, like I said, not all situations are perfect and ideal, was actually that their bonus, they had a KPI that said that we needed to basically ship it before the end of the year. And obviously their bonus is tied to that KPI. And the bonus is pretty substantial. Now, sure, that's not the best reasons and best motivations to be putting pressure on a team and putting pressure on people. But because I decided to approach it this way, and I decided to try and understand those things, understand the more systematic things and what their goals were, I now had information, and I could use that information to then actually put his mind at ease. And I realized, well, what I need to do is actually spend more time communicating with him, more time communicating timelines, more time communicating that we have options, that we do have options to be able to drop certain things, or, we had certain strategies that we could have done in order to actually get something out the door by Christmas. Whilst I may not have completely agreed with it, like I probably would have preferred to have a bit more time, we have options. So I can do some tweaks. We can make it happen. We can achieve his goal. It's not going to be detrimental too bad to the customers. It's actually going to probably be fine, and happy days, right? And purely spending time to do that and then spending more time to manage him that way, a lot of that pressure just disappeared, because now he had confidence that we're going to actually help him achieve his KPI, and he wasn't stressing about his bonus anymore. Which, again, like I said, not a perfect situation, but these are situations that we run into. And this has always served me very, very well. So I kind of want to start with that one. I think it's a very, very powerful technique. The next one is to put things down on paper. Now, this isn't about like put it down on paper so we have a record of it and we can say, hey, you said this and that. No, I'm talking about something completely different. So another story. I was working with a product manager, and she kind of had this problem, which is just such a common problem in companies. And originally what she came to me was that she was struggling with the stakeholders and the roadmap. Basically, they couldn't align on the roadmap. Everything was changing. They couldn't, every second day there was a different opinion of what should be more important on the roadmap. And tried everything, and she just felt like she was really struggling with getting them to align on the roadmap. And obviously that's causing pain for herself and the team because things are changing, moving goalposts, right? When we unpacked it, what we really realized was that strategy was missing. That was the key problem, not necessarily that there was anything wrong with the roadmap. It was the fact that we didn't have something to ground everybody on. Now you might be thinking, well, how do we create a strategy if we're in an environment where we're not empowered to do so? Because like this is an easy fix if you're empowered to do so. Go create a strategy, come back, align them on the strategy, happy days. But if you're not empowered to do so, how do you do that? And that was the same situation that she was in. So the answer to that is, well, let's put something down on paper. So we were going to have a hard time trying to get everyone into a room and try and workshop strategy, especially being very senior people. They're not going to spend a day with us, and they're just going to be hard to engage. In fact, she was already having trouble to engage with them to get alignment on the roadmap. So instead, what we did was, why don't we just put something down? Why don't we start with the roadmap? Why don't we start to look at what we think the themes should be, like the strategic pillars that we kind of have, basically putting together a lightweight strategy, right? What do we think the OKRs should be, based on our own knowledge and research and data? And how about we put it all together? We did it all in like a Miro board. I was trying to find a picture of it so I could actually show it, but we had this big Miro board. And let's just put it in front of them. Let's put in front basically what she thinks the strategy should be, what the pillars should be, what the goals should be, and let's get them to react to it. Because a funny thing with human nature and stakeholders is that you may have trouble trying to get engagement with them, but you'll never have trouble trying to get engagement with them when they are ready to tell you that you're wrong. So if you put something in front of them and they react to it, they are very quick to engage with it to just tell you that it's the wrong strategy, which is great. That's exactly what you want, because trying to get them to say, well, what do you think the strategy is? They won't say anything. But instead of you say, I think it's this, and they say, no, it's not, you're like, cool. All right. Why isn't it that? Like, what do you then think it is? And then they will correct you. And it's always a much easier way to actually get them to engage with you. So a really good influencing technique is to put something down on paper and just get them to react to it. Doesn't need to be perfect. Just go, this is what we're thinking. And then they'll tell you that you're wrong. And you go, well, great. Thanks for telling me that I'm wrong. Can you help me understand your perspective and where you think I went wrong and what it should be? Now, obviously, she had multiple stakeholders. So we didn't have one person saying that it was wrong. We had multiple. So the next question became, how do we align all that, right? How do we resolve the conflict between the fact that we just went from 5 people can't agree on the roadmap to now 5 people can't agree on the strategy? And this is where the next technique comes in, which is what I call the third reference point. I got it from a facilitation course. They called it that, but I'll explain to you what it means. So what was happening is kind of this, right? Or at least we end up in these situations all the time. Like somebody thinks it's a 6, somebody thinks it's a 9. And it's just people's opinions. And when you think about this type of conversation, this is 2 reference points. It's person A and then person B. So 1, 2, and they're just talking to each other's. The challenging part about this is we're only using our words. So words can only take us so far. And the other challenge with it is sometimes it can feel like a personal attack where we're basically, you're disagreeing with me and we're facing off against each other's, right? It's like a standoff. Now, the truth is, underneath every single idea or thought or opinion, there is a whole bunch of underlying assumptions, beliefs, experiences, mental models, the list goes on, that has led that person to that belief and to that thought or that idea, right? So part of our job, again, maybe cycling back to the first one with leading with empathy, is we need to try and unpack all of those things. And that's a very hard thing to do when you only have 2 reference points. So what we do is we create a third reference point. And putting something down on paper is a great way to create a third reference point. And you can see even in the sketch there, you can even physically start to reorientate yourselves where you're not facing each other's anymore. You're now both facing something else. Now, how do you do that in a virtual environment? You can't physically reorientate yourself, but pulling up a Miro board or any thing and sharing your screen is going to create a third reference point. But what we start to do here is we start to stop trying to argue between each other's opinions and thoughts. And now we start to put those thoughts and opinions down on paper. And then we can start to unpack them. And the best part about putting it down on paper is we kind of get this. Credit to Jeff Patton for this sketch. But we start to actually have this, right? Like we put it down and we start to think, oh, is that what you mean by it? And then the other thing we can do is we can start to unpack things and start to compare things. You can even just do like a pros and cons against 4 different options. And then we can start to compare the options. Which one has more pros? Which one has stronger pros? Which one has more cons? All those types of things. And the other thing that you start to unpack here is you start to make or almost tease out what's opinion and what's, data and fact, right? Is that just what you think and that's an assumption? Or is it actually, okay, this is actually based on some type of evidence based, right? And you may not walk out of that with a completely resolved conflict, right? Like you might not get everything down on paper, unpack it all, pros and cons, all those types of things, create a shared understanding. You might still end up in a stalemate where there's still some unresolved things. And often in my experience, when we get to that stalemate, it's often because there's still some things that are opinion, not based on data. And what you can then do is you can just circle those things and say, well, great. Our next steps will be to go and get some evidence to either support or not support your opinion. And then we'll reconvene in a couple of days' time and we can look at that data and come to a final decision. But the only way you're going to really pave that path in order to get there and to move it away from people's opinions and move it towards actual data and actual assumptions and actual beliefs is through the third reference point, or at least that's always been a very good tool for me to help me achieve that. So we did exactly that. We got everybody in a room. We had that Miro board. We got them to all tell us that it was wrong. And then we started to put down what they thought was actually right. And then we started to be able to create essentially what we did with the third reference point and the same thing here. Well, why do you believe that? Why do you believe that? And we actually, in that workshop, managed to get to a good level of agreement between it, at least on a priority order of what we think the strategic themes should be and the goals. And that resolved and helped a lot because now the roadmap was much more stable because we had something to basically pull all those stakeholders back to say, well, remember, we all agreed that this was more important than that, and this is our current goal. So I understand that you really want that, but it doesn't align to that goal, so it sits over here on the roadmap. My fourth tip is a influence technique, also a conflict resolution technique that is about how do you say no without actually saying no. So I have this strongly held belief to a degree, but it's based on experience. And that is that the best product managers, or even just the best people at influencing, don't say no a lot. So we often be told, as a product manager, you need to say no a lot. I actually disagree with that. I think early in your career, you say no a lot because you don't know how to say it in any other way. Instead, as you get more senior and you get more influential, you start to learn how to say no without actually saying the word no. And I'll give you a few techniques in order to achieve this. The first one is, well, how does this fit with our current strategy? Which is very similar to that example that I gave just a minute ago, which was, okay, that thing that you think is really important on the roadmap and should go here, well, guess what? It doesn't align to our current goal. So it probably should sit over here. So rather than saying no, you could actually even put the question back onto them to say, okay, I hear you, great idea. Not disagreeing that it's not a great idea. You're a brilliant stakeholder. Can you tell me how that fits with our current goal? Because our current OKR is this. And then they're probably going to have a hard time to actually give you an answer on that. You'll say, okay, cool. So where do you think that then fits in this picture? And you're basically putting it back onto them to kind of basically say no to themselves. Now, obviously, this all precursors on the fact that you do have clarity on your strategy. You do have clarity on things like your goals and the current OKRs that you're chasing. But that's always a great technique, and probably also a reason why having those things is so important, and why things like prioritization and stakeholder management and conflict resolution become so difficult when you don't have those things, because you don't have anything to ground your stakeholders back to and push people back to. Another one is simply like if you have your roadmap or any visual board, you can say, okay, cool, great idea, love it, thanks for suggesting it. Where do you think it sits on this roadmap? Like, do you think it's more important than these things? Or do you think it's like less important? Like, where do you think it sits on this roadmap? And at least in my experience, most of the time, vast majority of the time, they end up looking at the things on the roadmap and they go, oh, no, actually, that's not more important than that. No, that's really important. No. And then they end up putting it like 5 or 6 things down the list. And you're like, okay, cool. So it's actually not more important than all this work that we're already focusing on, by the way. It actually sits here. And that is a much more powerful way to influence them than to say, no, we can't do that because we're working on this. And they'll say, no, but this is really, really important. You're like, no, we're working on this. Instead, flip it back onto them and say, is it more important or less important than this? And they'll probably say it's less important. Unless it's really important, then okay, let's have a conversation about that, right? Because maybe they're right. Maybe we actually do need to change our priorities and we need to pivot. And then the last thing on this one that I want to take you through, there's a lot more that we can go into this, is to just be able to communicate the why better, right? If you can really articulate why you're doing something in a way, they might say, well, okay, that's really amazing and we should be doing that. And now I understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. And I can understand how my idea or my thing is much less important than what you're actually working on. And a technique that I encourage or I coach on to use, and I use this all the time, is to be able to tell a story from top down to bottom up. And what that looks like is basically this. So if you think about from a top down perspective, you can have a narrative that looks a lot like this. In order to realize our vision, which is blah, right? Our strategy is that we're going to do X, Y, and Z. Therefore, we are currently focused on this current outcome, right? This current OKR. That's our objective at the moment. And we are focused on solving this opportunity as it relates to that outcome. And we're basically building this thing in order to solve that opportunity. And what you've done is, rather than saying, we're working on this thing or we're working on this opportunity and it's really, really important, we're now giving them the context. We're explaining where it fits in the whole puzzle and why we're focused on it first. And you can do it the other way around as well. You can start at the bottom and say, we need to build this. This is what we're working on. It's the top priority. It's the most important thing because it solves this customer pain point. And if we can solve this customer pain point, we have good reason to believe that it's going to help us achieve this outcome. And if we achieve this outcome, it's the first step that we're taking towards realizing our strategy, which is this. And we need to do that in order to get to our winning aspiration, right? Which is our vision at the top. And providing context, I think, is a really powerful thing. I think the main thing to think about with this is how do you provide the context to people that they can then say no to themselves, right? They can understand where you're coming from. And we can do the same even in an isolated perspective, right? Like framing opportunities. This is my common thing. You can take them through the data, the problem that they're facing, your interpretation of that, and then what you're proposing to do. So to give an example of this, it could look like, currently 5,000 users per month leave items in their shopping cart unchecked out. This is leading to X type of pain point, right? Or X amount of dollars lost as a business or something like that. I believe this is because of these reasons. So this is your diagnosis. What is your hypothesis about it? And I propose we do X. And again, you're giving them that context. They're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that 5,000 users leave, I don't know, just making it up, right? But they didn't realize that. And then they don't realize how much money that's potentially costing us or what type of customer experience impact it's having. And you're giving them the context to say, okay, well, the thing that I was thinking about is actually nowhere near as bad as that. So thanks for the context and I'll keep my thing to myself, or I'm okay now with that not being the most important thing. And this is the same with resolving conflict. A lot of it's about how do I give them the context to understand where I'm coming from and unpack the context of where they're coming from. The last thing to think about is, and this is probably just like a pillar that can kind of sit underneath everything, which is like, how do we just win hearts and minds and just build more trust, rapport, and respect with people? So if we understand that stakeholder management is stakeholder engagement, then we need to engage people. If we understand that we can better engage and we can better collaborate if we have stronger relationships with people, then this becomes really important, right? The fact that we need to build relationships and we need to build trust and which means we need to invest into those activities. And that's really, really important for us as product managers. So from the book, The Trusted Advisor, there's a few trust formulas, but I just thought I'd throw up one. Most of them all align, so I didn't want to overbear you with heaps of different formulas because they all align. So Trusted Advisor, probably the most popular trust formula, says that trustworthiness is essentially a combination of credibility, reliability, intimacy, and self-orientation. So really means that, are you credible? Are you reliable? Because if you're credible but not reliable, I can't trust you. Intimacy is the empathy part, like do you actually like care and those types of things. The self-orientation is also whether your self-interest align to theirs, because you can have all those things, but if I feel like you've got a different agenda, then I'm not going to trust you either. But I just want to hone in on a few things, because there's a few things in this that I think we can invest time and energy into and actually just be better at it. And the first one is the fact that competency builds trust, which is that credibility thing. But a fascinating thing about competency is that it's actually not competency that builds trust, it's actually confidence. Obviously, competency over time will build trust. But human psychology has shown us, or psychologists have shown us, that we use confidence as a proxy for competency. There was a study done in 1982 that looked at this. Basically, two psychologists did an experiment where they put 48 subjects through basically this imaginary scenario where they gave them essentially a bunch of results. They were what the people predicted their performance to be in a tennis tournament, and then what their actual results would be. They then asked the participants to rate each of those people in terms of how competent they are at tennis. And what's interesting is you think people would just look at the actual scores, right? But people didn't. They actually looked at it with those two scores combined. And the more fascinating thing was the ones who projected or thought that they were going to perform better, even if they performed terrible, still were perceived to have a higher competency than those who predicted low and performed high. Super fascinating phenomena, right? So the way that we project ourselves and the way that we work with our stakeholders is also really important. We need to project confidence, and which is going to project more competency, which will help us build trust. I think this one is like the lowest hanging fruit that we can work on. We can just work on trying to come across in a more confident manner and have more conviction in what we talk about. And sometimes that's a little bit deeper because we need to do the research and get the data so then we can have conviction in what we're saying. But we should have conviction in what we're saying. And no stakeholder is going to believe us if we don't believe ourselves, right? Like, we need to have conviction in what we're saying. The next low-hanging fruit that I just thought would be a super useful tip that I use a lot as well is consistency. Consistency is also a proxy for reliability. So another thing that psychology has kind of shown for us, because again, reliability is only something that's going to be built up over time. And as a result, we use proxies in order to try and perceive reliability. And one of them is consistency. So maybe just a personal reflection here, and I do this often. I reflect on my consistency. Like, it's small things, right? Like, if I said I would send a follow-up email, did I do it? Did I do it in a timely manner? Do I always do it in a timely manner? If I said I was going to send week notes or a summary or an update at the end of every week, do I do that? Do I skip weeks? Do I not skip weeks? Do I reschedule meetings? If I said I was going to send an agenda beforehand, do I send an agenda beforehand? All these little things are just little actions that, believe it or not, actually erode our trustworthiness and we're doing ourselves harm. And as a result, we can also use it as a tool to also project more trustworthiness, right? So we can stay consistent with those things, but we can also be consistent in our formats. A format that I use all the time is the past, present, future format. So essentially, I always follow what are the things we've done in the past, how are experiments going, all that type of stuff. What's the product health? I then move to what are we currently doing? And then I always touch on the future. What are we going to do next? And if you follow this format, it creates consistency, which can create a sense of greater reliability. People can then know what to expect from you. that creates more trustworthiness, and it's going to help you be better at influencing and also be better at resolving conflict, because you'll be able to come across as a more trustworthy source, and they're going to be more inclined to believe you and less inclined with arguing with you too much as well. So not saying you have to use that format, but just come up with a consistent format and stick to it. It's such a simple thing. Agendas, consistent format. It will project more trustworthiness. So that's it. That's 5 tips, strategies that I've used that help me influence stakeholders all the time and resolve conflicts. Remember that empathy goes both ways. You've got to empathize with them. Lead every one of those, conflicts, every one of those stakeholder engagement moments with empathy. Try to understand them. Approach it with curiosity. Oh, interesting. Even if you think it's a dumb idea. Interesting idea. You should try to understand why and what they're coming from. There's probably a good thing, a good reason for it. And let's be honest, they've got a wealth of knowledge. I think we can be very ignorant and naive to not want to actually tap into that knowledge and to choose to ignore it. I made that mistake early in my career. Use a third reference point. Great way to resolve conflict, put things down on paper, reorientate the conversation away from person's opinions to actually something down on paper, which is independent and unbiased, and we're not attacking each other's anymore. Use the strategy of putting something down on paper to get people to engage with you. Remember, you might struggle to get them to engage with you, but you won't if you put something down on paper, because they'll be quick to tell you that you're wrong. Leverage that. Allow them to tell you that you're wrong. Approach it with empathy. Find ways to say no without saying no. Provide context to them. Ask them questions. Make them reflect on your current strategy, the current goals, those types of things. And there's just some low-hanging fruit that we can do in order to build more trustworthiness with others around us. And obviously, we can take that a lot further by nourishing relationships and really, really focusing on that. So that could be a whole talk in itself. So I wanted to touch on it, but couldn't really go too deep into it. But I wanted to give something actionable. Some of you already read my newsletter. I've got self-paced courses, as Petra mentioned, up on product pathways. And that is all I have. Thank you. Post the talk, we spent a good 30 minutes on Q&A. You can watch the talk by clicking the link here, or it should be up in the top corner somewhere. It'll pop up. But we talked through a few different examples, questions like how do you generate buy-in or get stakeholders to buy into paths that they disagreed with, as well as how do you convince stakeholders to allocate time and create space for key activities like discovery, and a whole lot more. If you want to watch the video and you want to watch the Q&A and go and take a look at that, I highly encourage it. But regardless, I hope you got a lot of value out of that talk as much as they did, the audience did at the time. As I said, we had about 80 to 100 people in attendance, and I got a 5 out of 5 review. I always try and make my talks actionable, something for you to take away. And I really pride myself on that. So let me know what the thing that really stood out to you in the comments. What was that thing that you really resonated with you, or the thing that you really learned? I'd love to hear that as well. And I'd love to know any other feedback on the talk. This was one of my more casual ones because it was a private talk, but I hope you got a lot of value out of it nonetheless. And thanks for watching. I will see you at the next one.